On the morning of her fourth HR meeting in 14 months, she brought a binder. It was 2 inches thick, tabbed and color-coded, and she had built it the way she built everything, methodically, without announcement. The HR director looked at it the way people look at things they would prefer not to exist. She set it on the table between them without a word. He slid it back across toward her and said, with the measured patience of someone who had delivered this sentence many times before, that the company had a process and that the process had been followed. She picked up the binder, thanked him for his time, walked to her car, and sat in the parking lot for about 4 minutes. Then she drove home. She opened her laptop, and she wrote a very different kind of letter. She had worked at the company for 6 years. She was good at her job in a way that was easy to say and harder to argue with, because the documentation existed. 6 performance reviews, all of them placing her in the top tier of her department. Client satisfaction records, revenue figures tied directly to her accounts and her decisions. She had been promoted after year 2, given a title that reflected what she was actually doing, and passed over for a second promotion in year 5 that went instead to a colleague with fewer measurable results, a louder presence, and a friendship with the regional director that went back more than a decade, to a previous company, to a previous chapter of both their careers. The colleague was also the person making her days at work extremely difficult. It had started in the way these things tend to start, in the register of plausible deniability, in the space between what is said and what is said in front of anyone who would remember it accurately. Comments about her work that carried another meaning underneath. Being removed from email threads on accounts she managed. Arriving at meetings where decisions about her own projects had already been settled. Exclusions quiet enough to require no explanation and numerous enough to have a cumulative weight that was hard to describe without sounding fragile. And then, as the colleague's comfort with her tolerance grew, the behavior became less careful. There were remarks made in team settings that the room received as jokes and that she received as something else. There was a meeting in which she presented a proposal and the regional director interrupted her twice to ask the colleague to clarify points she had not finished making. There was a client strategy presentation she had built over 3 weeks, including the research framework, the data structure, and the full written narrative that appeared 6 weeks later in a leadership review meeting with minor formatting changes and the colleague's name on the cover slide. She had noticed. She had said nothing in that moment. She had documented it, the way she documented everything, because she had learned early that the feelings pass, but the record remains.
Documentation was how she thought, and it had been how she thought since long before any of this started. Dates, times, present parties, exact language when she had it and approximate language when she did not, followed by a note distinguishing the two. She retained every email, every version of every document she created with metadata intact, every instant message thread, every record of who had accessed what and when on the shared systems. She kept it all on a personal drive, separate from the company network, organized in a structure that someone else could navigate if they needed to. She filed her first formal complaint 16 months before that 4th meeting. She had waited to do so not because she doubted herself, but because she wanted the record to be indisputable before she put it in front of anyone. The HR director had responded within 2 business days with an email containing the phrase, "We take these matters seriously." There was a meeting. There was an investigation described as thorough. There was a follow-up conversation in which she was told that the colleague had been counseled, that the behavior had been addressed at the appropriate level, and that she should expect the working environment to improve. The working environment did not improve. It worsened slightly, in the way things sometimes worsen when the person causing harm learns they have been reported and not held accountable. She filed a second complaint when the presentation incident occurred and provided the version history metadata showing her original authorship, including creation timestamps predating the colleague's claimed work by nearly 3 weeks. HR reviewed the evidence and determined the matter to be a collaborative misunderstanding. She asked, in a written follow-up, for a copy of the investigation findings so she could understand the basis for that conclusion, the request was declined. Investigation records, she was told, were confidential in order to protect all parties. She wrote that response into her binder, word for word. The third complaint came after she was reassigned off 2 client accounts she had personally cultivated, accounts with names she had brought into the company's portfolio through her own relationship work. The reassignment happened following a meeting she had not been invited to, conducted by the regional director and her colleague. She was informed of the outcome by email at 4:47 in the afternoon. The accounts were transferred to her colleague. She did not escalate in the moment. She submitted a formal grievance through the internal portal the following morning with supporting documentation and received an automated confirmation of receipt. No human being followed up within the stated response window. No human being followed up at all. That was the 4th item in the binder.
There was a 5th thing she had been doing, separately, across the same months, that changed the nature of everything that came later. She had been listening, not organizing, not building any kind of formal coalition, not conducting interviews or circulating anything, just asking careful questions of colleagues she had known long enough to trust and sitting quietly with the answers they gave her. What she was hearing was not unique to her. There was a pattern inside the company, distributed across departments and years, of complaints that followed the same arc. A complaint was filed, an investigation was conducted, a finding of insufficient evidence or collaborative misunderstanding was issued, the subject of the complaint faced no meaningful consequence, and in 2 documented cases, the person who had filed the complaint was quietly moved to a role with less visibility shortly afterward. One employee had left the company entirely the prior year, 12 months after her own complaint was closed with no findings. She reached out to that former employee privately. They met once and spoke for a long time. What she came away with was not new information so much as a clearer picture of the shape of what she already knew. When she got home from that 4th meeting with the 2-inch binder that the director had slid back across the table, she opened her laptop and navigated to the public-facing website of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. She read the process for filing a formal charge of discrimination. She read it twice. Then she drafted the charge, attached her documentation archive, and included the names of 5 current and former employees who had expressed willingness to provide corroborating accounts. She attached the presentation metadata. She submitted on a Tuesday. She returned to the office on Wednesday and said nothing to anyone about it except one colleague she trusted, and even then, she only said that she had taken a formal step outside the company and that they should be prepared for a process that moves slowly. The EEOC conducted intake review and found the charge sufficient to warrant a formal investigation. The assigned investigator was methodical and unhurried in the way that federal processes tend to be when they are working correctly. She requested documents. She interviewed current and former employees across multiple departments and seniority levels. She asked to see the internal complaint logs, the portal records, and the HR case files. She specifically asked for the investigation files that had previously been described to the complainant as confidential and therefore unavailable for her review. In a federal investigation, that particular designation carries less weight. Those files were produced. What the investigator found was not only what had been reported by one employee over 14 months, it was a pattern of complaint closure, consistently resolved in favor of the subject, disproportionately affecting women in client-facing roles over a period spanning 4 years and documented in the company's own records. 2 of those closures bore the HR director's signature. One of them preceded a wrongful termination claim that had been settled out of court for an undisclosed amount 18 months earlier. The EEOC issued a finding of reasonable cause. The company declined an offer of conciliation. A civil action was authorized and filed in federal court.
The regional director resigned 3 weeks after the filing became public record. He cited personal reasons. The colleague was placed on administrative leave pending a separate internal review. The HR director was removed from his role 6 months later in a reorganization described in the company's internal communications as a structural realignment. She had not asked for any of those specific outcomes. She had not built her binder imagining those outcomes. She had documented the truth as it happened to her, in real time, with the discipline of someone who had decided early on that if she was going to be ignored, she was going to be ignored on record. The case was resolved through a negotiated settlement. She is not permitted to discuss the terms. What she has said to the people who knew what she went through is that the process was harder and slower and more impersonal than anything she had imagined, and that the outcome was real, and that it is documented in a federal court filing that exists permanently. She works somewhere else now, somewhere better, she says, and she says it plainly, without elaboration. She still keeps performance documentation out of habit, in the same kind of folder structure, because that is how she has always worked. She hopes she never needs it again. What she knows is that the binder mattered, every date and every name and every carefully noted word. A system designed to manage her one complaint at a time was not built to handle all of them at once, laid out in sequence with the full weight of the pattern visible. The company had a process. She had one too. Hers ran longer and kept better